Peace and all good. Imagine the scene described in today's gospel. It takes place in Jerusalem at the Roman military quarters. In a room, there are two men facing each other. One is dressed in a white Roman toga. He is the governor Pontius Pilate. He wears a big gold ring on his finger, a sign of his political power and authority. The other, the disheveled-looking man called Jesus. He's a poor member of a conquered nation. Still, the governor perceives him as a security threat to the Roman Empire. The governor knows that some Jewish men have been involved in the violent rebellion against the Roman rule and disturbing peace. It's a common wisdom in the Roman circles in Jerusalem that no matter how benign individual Jewish men may appear to be, they are potential religious fanatics up to no good. The governor must be tough and decisive in action. Kindness, generosity, compassion, what a Pollyannish, foolish view. This is now how you maintain peace in the Roman Empire. And yet, strangely enough, it is not the mighty Roman governor of Judea, but rather a poor, charismatic peasant from Galilee who demonstrates what true power is. Jesus speaks to Pilate about the truth. When asked, Jesus confirms that he is a king, but he redefines what kingdom and power means. He says, "My kingdom does not belong to this world." What do those words mean? Is he telling Pilate that he's only concerned about purely spiritual realities that have nothing to do with the mundane physical realities of his people? Well, I don't think so. Jesus is not a Greek philosopher. He doesn't divide the world into strictly separate physical and spiritual parts. After all, in his lifetime, Jesus preached the message of hope and empowerment for the downtrodden. Jesus fed the hungry crowds, healed the sick, raised the dead. His life and mission was about liberating the captives and letting the oppressed go free. So when Jesus says to Pontius Pilate that his kingdom does not belong to this world, he's saying that the vision and the values that he lives by are not like the vision and the values of the governor of Judea. Jesus' vision and values, for that matter, don't align with any political or religious system that oppresses and tramples down on the poor, that wreaks havoc on our common home and undermines the common good. Jesus' kingdom has little to do with fear, with narrow self-interest or brute force. Rather, his kingdom is about compassion, generosity, nonviolence. It is about solidarity, healing, not only for human family, but also healing for Earth's community of life. Jesus' kingdom is about the truth of what it means to be fully human within the larger context of God's good and beautiful creation. And that is the authentic power. It is the power of Christ the King, who is nevertheless no stranger to vulnerability and pain, to evolutionary travails and vicissitude of human history. Over the last years, we have heard a number of influential political leaders in our country and in other places around the world demonizing the refugees, exploiting public fears. In the past, prominent public figures in our country, for example, compared Syrian refugees to rabid dogs and rattlesnakes. What is lost in that demagoguery are the facts that over the past few years, many hundreds of thousands of ordinary Syrians, Iraqis, Afghanis, Muslim, Christians, other minorities have been have had their humanity compromised. They have been victims of cruelty, of violence. Do you wonder, what does it say about us as a nation when so many of our governors, politicians, some news medias, and the segments of our population are so quick to demonize and scapegoat refugees who are desperately fleeing violence and terror in so many parts of the world? And again, it's not only in the United States, in my native Poland. Oftentimes, and right now, not far from where I used to live, in the northeast part of Poland, there are thousands of refugees from Middle East, from Afghanistan, kind of at the border. Without getting into the political context, what is often lost is the humanity, their humanity, and our need to respond with compassion, with mercy. The Patriarch of the Syrian Catholic Church, Ignaz Yusuf Yunam, wrote a few years ago that, and I quote, "For years, the so-called ISIS have received money, weapons, and religious indoctrination from Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries with the supervision of the West," end of the quote. The Patriarch also mentioned about the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the chaos that broke out in the region as a result of it, and which in turn helped create conditions that gave rise to ISIS. Earlier this year, there was a report released. It's called The Cost of War Project from Brown University. And it looked at the 20 years of U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, our response to our war on terror, and the cost of it. The global cost of war on terror stands at $8 trillion and nearly 1 million deaths. In what ways the feast of Christ the King could inform our collective attitudes, feelings, and action towards the refugees displaced by war profiteers, displaced by human-induced climate change? In today's gospel, Christ the King links his divine reign with the reign of truth. And one of the most difficult truths to accept is the truth about ourselves, our shadow side. It is about our willingness to see not just a plank in our brother's eyes, but to take notice of the beam in our collective eye as the American people. Could it be that Christ the King might be speaking to us through Pope Francis, or the Cost of War Project from Brown University, or through Franciscan Action Network? They and so many other individuals, organizations testify to the truth that rises above the callous, racist, oftentimes very simplistic views that are yet amplified in our society and even in our church. Pope Francis, the Cost of War Project from Brown University, Franciscan Action Network, and so many other social movements challenge us to claim the power of solidarity, of coherent, integrated approach to dealing with social and environmental issues. That is not that different than the kingdom of God that Jesus spoke about. Let us not succumb as a nation or as the Catholic Church in the United States to fear, to spiritual escapism, or small, narrow-minded thinking that anesthetizes our hearts and paralyzes our actions. Instead, let us dare to claim the power of Christ the King in us, collaboratively, creatively, and with a prophetic courage. Peace and all good.